Hi, welcome to Using the History panel for retouching. I just want to note before this starts that I constantly refer to the history panel as the history palette. It's just changed its name in this version, CS6. I've been using CS6 for about a month and a half, 2 months now, and I was using the history palette version, the previous versions of Photoshop since 1996. So it's taking me a while to get used to the new terminology. Please forgive me. It is now the history panel. I'm including a small video this week on how I use the history palette for retouching. I find it to be a very useful tool for making minor retouching and doing some overall changes. It really is a very flexible and useful way to accomplish some of these retouching tasks. Okay, this is Lindsay, gorgeous model for me, and I'm going to show you how I would use the history palette to retouch her. Before I get to that, we've got a little bit of a hair in here. It's barely visible, but let's come in here with the lasso tool. Just outline that. I'm going to hit Shift and Delete. That's going to bring up my fill box, and I'm going to have content aware here. Click OK, and that's going to get rid of that hair, or should. Let me just check in there. Yeah, it's pretty good. There's another one here. Let's try it again. There, you can see that. If it doesn't work the way you want it, come in here with maybe a 50%, right up here, 50% clone tool, and just kind of blend that in a bit. I'm going to redefine here and just play down that little bit of a brow wrinkle there, because she's a very young girl, so she doesn't really need to be wrinkling yet. Okay, right here, the healing brush. Let's see, healing brush right here. Let's make sure it's spot healing brush. If we come in here and just go over that area, that's going to blend that right in. I could use the spot healing brush for these hairs as well. You kind of, depending on, that seems to be working even better than the content aware. They are both very useful tools. If I want to come in here and just play that down, remember we're talking about the history brush, I can go back one step in the history palette and then repaint it in. But I'm just going to eliminate these, okay? And right there. So now we've just kind of prepared our palette. I'll look down here. Everything else looks good except maybe this little spot over her lip. Awesome. And that extra red spot down there. I'll just... And I'm using the spot healing brush and just using small little dabs there. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to show you how I would brighten up the eyes, brighten and whiten the teeth a bit using the history palette. The history palette is over here. It may or may not be clustered with your adjustments and styles. It depends on how you've reset your palettes, but if you don't see it, you can also go to Window and just make sure that you just click on History and it'll come up and be visible. Okay, at the top of the history palette, above this double line, you'll see a snapshot. That's how we open the image. If I click here, I'm making another snapshot of where I am now in the image. So this is my before, this is my after. Let me zoom out just a bit so we see Oliver. There's my before, there's my after. I use this very constantly as a tool to make sure I haven't missed anything or I haven't gone too far. Over here I see this area, it's looking a little washed out. So I'm going to bring my clone tool down a bit. I'm not sure I like that much, but I'm just going to play a little bit back and forth here and then kind of blend her forehead to a nice smooth tone. Okay, I think that's a little bit better. Okay, like I said, we're going to use this to pop some eye sparkle and make her teeth a little bit whiter. So the snapshots stay with your image as long as you have it open. The last 20 operations or steps I've done with the image will appear in the lower part of the history palette. I can access any of these states as long as they're visible, but remember it's just the last 20 steps that will appear down here. If you want to get back to any specific point in your image, you need to make a snapshot and have it up here. I'm going to get rid of that second snapshot because that one did not have the forehead smoothed out the way I want it. So now we've got the before and the after there. Okay, so we have this one, which is spotted. Okay, that just means the spot's taken out. That's old photography terms there. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, and you'll read about the history palette in your notes in the book, so I'm not going to go through all the steps. You should read that for yourselves and practice it a bit, but I want to show you specifically how I use the history palette as a retouching tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the entire image. I'm going to come up to image adjustments, and I'm going to use curves, and I'm going to brighten it all up, everything. I'm not going to worry about anything. What I'm looking at right now is the eyes. Okay? I'm going to make the eyes bluer because I want her eyes to look bluer than they actually look in the image, because they were in real life a bit bluer. And everything's gone blue, so it's a little hard to tell there, but I'm going to click OK. Okay? So that's a curves layer. And I'm going to save that as a snapshot called bluer. All right? So here's my starting point. Wherever I click on the name is my starting point. Wherever I click on the left-hand column and put my history brush icon, that's where I'm painting from. All right? So I'm going to go over here to the history brush. I have two versions of the history brush. We're using the straight history brush, not the art history brush tool, which is wild and crazy and a little abstract. I'm going to come in here and I'm setting my brush at 50%, so I can come in partially at a time. I don't want to do the whole thing at once. It may be too much at 50 even. But what I'm doing here is I'm starting from the point where I've retouched her, gotten rid of the spots, and I'm painting in from the blue version of her. Now if I come in here and see how it blues, makes her eye turn much bluer and brighter. Okay. Now that may be too much, but we could also go back to that spot and paint it in at a lower opacity. I actually kind of like it. I think it looks pretty nice. Okay? So, again, you want to check to make sure that you haven't gone too far. So there's my before, there's my after. Again, we're clicking on the name of the state to go to that state. If we're painting from a state, all we have to do is put the history brush next to that state. Okay, so there's my before and my after, and I like that. Okay, now here's how we lighten teeth, how I lighten teeth. I go to hue and saturation. What makes teeth look dull is they have too much yellow in them and they're too dark. So we're going to take the saturation down, and that basically takes all the color, including the yellow, out of them, and I'm going to bring the lightness up a bit. Now her teeth are not very much in need of this at all. They're actually very beautiful teeth. I'm going to come in here and make a new snapshot named teeth. And so now I want to go to my snapshot 1, because that's where the eyes retouched. I'm actually going to take spotted away so I don't get confused, and maybe bluer too. We'll just get rid of those so we're not confusing anybody. So this is retouched 1, okay, and teeth. Now again, we want to paint from the teeth version. That's with the teeth lightened and desaturated, but we want to start from the retouched version. So we're just painting in the teeth here. Now I know 50% is going to be too much for this. I want it down at maybe 30%, and we can paint as many times over as we want, and I'm going to zoom in. I just use the spacebar and the Command or Control key to zoom in. Okay, and then I just come in here and lightly just paint the teeth, and you can see there we go. And if you want, while you're here, you can even kind of touch just a little bit in the whites of the eyes. they tend to get overdone pretty fast, so be very wary of not doing too much to the eyes, okay? Okay, so there is my girl. Let's do another after shot. Okay, so there's my before image right there before we did anything to it. There's my after image with the retouching, the eyes brighten, the teeth brighten. So again, before and after. You see the teeth are subtle. She doesn't need a huge amount, and you don't want to do a huge amount because even if the teeth are quite yellow and dull, it's going to be painfully obvious if you do huge retouching to any parts of the anatomy of your subject. So you want to keep it fairly subtle. Just give them a little pop of brightening. Okay, so the before again and after. And again, often I do befores and afters like this to make sure I haven't gone too far. Now as I look at this, the one last thing I might do, which doesn't have anything to do with the history palette, is just take the clone tool under her eyes because she's got a bit of a dark circle going on under the eyes. At a fairly low percentage, 25-30%. Take the clone tool, sample, Alt or Option click at the just an inch or so below the circles, and then come in here and just go over those a little bit. Just kind of brighten those up. You don't want to get rid of them, you just want to brighten them a little bit. Just lighten them down. So again, this will be my completely after. Let's throw away the previous after. Okay. And we've got our before, after. So there's our retouch. Now she's never going to know I did that. It's subtle enough so she won't know it. That's the idea. You want something that looks realistic, but you want something that looks terrific too. So that's the way I use history to do retouching, just floating back and forth between a couple of steps to bring in a little bit extra of what I specifically want.